Hey guys, it's Sugar, and I'm here again tonight with my husband, Jeff.
Hello.
And tonight we thought we'd talk about, just because we were talking about it just casually, we thought why not bring it onto the podcast. So, lately we've seen commercials more so than what we initially saw for trailers for Death Note.
Hmm.
And we have, I think, similar feelings, each kind of different, picking apart of what we did and didn't like from the trailer. Why don't you start? Why don't we start with what we liked about Death Note and then start getting into this?
Like the anime itself.
The anime, yeah.
I mean, I think that anybody who watches Death Note, I can't think of anybody that I know who's watched it who hasn't taken something positive out of it. That's really enjoyed it. Yeah, I would say my favorite part about it is it's more of a, I don't know if you want to say a higher thinking concept, but it's just the idea of when I was watching it. A lot of the times when I would watch when I'd watch Light, I would think that for a long time what he was doing wasn't necessarily wrong.
Right. And I would have been in that same boat because it's kind of like when you put yourself in that situation where you're like, if I had this book, what would I do? Would I do the right thing and not do anything? Of course not. You would.
Well, arguably that's not even the right thing in the first place.
Well,
I personally believe there are some people who deserve to die.
but that's the thing. You would automatically, you try it out, but then you're like, in your mind, you're like, well, there are really terrible people. I would be doing the right thing. Even though, some people would argue against it, that it's not right, it's up to justice and all this other junk. But, I shouldn't say junk.
It gets very philosophical when you're arguing with people, especially people who don't believe that he was doing the proper thing at all.
Well,
and they're like,
yeah.
well, he should have just burnt a book or something like that. But and I don't know if you could burn it or destroy it in that way anyways. I don't think Ryuk would have allowed such a thing to happen, but
Well, they explained in the series about books and transferring and all that stuff, but we won't get into that because in case people haven't watched it, but I guess to an extent we'll be talking about spoilers, so it's no point to
if you haven't watched Death Note,
it.
just go onto Netflix or wherever you watch fine anime and do yourself a favor and watch the series, especially before you watch any of the films, because I mean there are some live action adaptations already before this Netflix one came out.
The Japanese one, yeah.
Yeah, and those weren't necessarily viewed upon very favorably by the community either. So,
Well, each is hit and miss. There's people that love it, people who don't. I haven't honestly seen the Japanese one. I've heard mixed things, so I've kind of just let it be for now. But we're both we subscribe to Netflix, so it's hard for us to ignore it. It's on.
I mean, we're gonna watch it.
Oh yeah, exactly, and it's available for us. It'll be right on the main page. I'm sure the day it comes out, it'll be hard for us to ignore. So we will be watching it, and that's kind of one of the things that we know we'll be watching because we've seen the original, so that's fine for us. So the original, like we were getting onto, is the fact of the book. It's doing what you think is right versus the justice system and so forth. And you're right about doing what you think is the right thing when it actually, it evolved into something that was far more than doing the right thing and being more like a god.
Well, I mean, like we were saying, we're not necessarily going to make this, a huge review of the series or anything like that. But I mean, it changes quite. His actions change quite abruptly from, where I felt he was justified and just, killing off terrible people and criminals and whatnot. Especially when you take a look at, obviously it's written from the standpoint of the Japanese culture, where, it's very different than a North American culture and ideologies on, what is justice and what isn't and whatnot. So there is a lot to be said about, especially when you look at it in the cultural sense, what's correct and what isn't if you had this kind of power. But
what do you mean on the Japanese sense?
Well, I mean, remember the Japanese culture, we're not that far removed from the idea that, if you wronged, justice was killing yourself. So the idea of death and justice kind of being one and the same in Japanese culture, they've always been intermingled quite a bit in comparison to like North America.
Well,
just as an example.
Justice is different from, in my mind, in that regard, as something of like dignity and honor. That's different for justice from my perspective. Yeah. But anyways, we won't get into that. We're talking about death.
It's a cultural thing. Yeah, it was interesting to read what other cultures think about Death Note as a whole, which is absolutely fantastic. A really good piece of anime should elicit different responses just depending on where you grew up, where you live, what your ideologies and your principles were, and whatnot. So I felt it was excellent, and the only real downgrade that the series hit was, I mean, where pretty much everybody feels it did was in its conclusion with what happened with. Again, we're going to talk spoilers. I'm not going to censor
just
myself
say whatever.
Here. When Elle ended up dying.
Yeah, that was the big turn. I think for everybody. I don't think anybody likes the ending. Let's be honest. When Elle died, it
feels
took
tacked on.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's odd because, yes, in a sense, we've been talking about this with our friends, and some of our friends have said, like, you don't want to necessarily end on a down note or where the villain wins, which I think at that point in the series, definitely Light has become the villain and Elle is the hero. So I can see why they maybe wanted to try and have Light at the end be caught and have some sort of justice happen to him, because that's cathartic. It's kind of what you want to see towards the end. But it felt really out of place. It felt rushed. It felt tacked on. It felt like a lesser anime at that point.
I wouldn't have minded it ending at Elle, honestly, because it kind of has the message that evil does run in the world. It's not like everything comes to a happy conclusion and sooner or later the bad guy's caught, because it's not usually what happens. There's evil in the world. It will be there. It doesn't matter if they think they're justified or not. I guess we could go into the other conversation we were having the other day about the anti-hero, but that's another conversation. But
I felt like it had to end. It had to end with Light dying to fulfill what Ryuk said at the start, which was that at some point he was going to write his name in the book.
Well, Elle had to die, obviously.
Well, Elle had to die, and I mean Light had to die too.
Well, yeah, because sooner or later it has to come back to bite you. You can't just get away with it forever.
Yeah, I almost wouldn't have minded it if Ryuk just at one point like it was like, I didn't tell you about this one rule, or he's like, I knew what you were going to do the entire time. The book is back to me. It's like, I'm bored with you now, or something like that.
Well, the whole thing, Ryuk, was that he was taking up his time to see what he would do. Yeah. So the fact that he would let it play out for as long as humanly possible, because he wanted to see what would happen. And he inevitably knew that he was going to die. It was just a matter of when and where and by who. Obviously, the audience thought it was Elle, but of course, we found out, sadly, that it wasn't.
Yeah. And I think that was the only part. That's the only part of the anime that I feel like moves it away from like a 10 into the 9 category, or maybe even like an 8.5. You can't give halves on my anime list, but
no.
To me it's like an 8.5, and that's with a really poor ending in my opinion. So
yeah,
if you haven't seen it yet, it's worth every minute.
Because it hits a lot of marks, and I know a lot of people use it as a great example of characters who use manipulation well, and the fact that he is like a mastermind behind all these people and all these things and these events, and it's really good in that sense, and it is very, very good. But now that we're looking at the I was about to say YouTube, the Netflix special that's coming, it's a little confusing. We've watched different trailers, and each one of them kind of showed a different perspective, like Ryuk, and through Light's kind of perspective, and a little bit from like the side of Elle. And I don't know what really to expect. Like, even though they've shown us this, like Elle, I don't really like, because just from what they've shown, not because he's African American, because some people hate this color washing stuff, and I really don't care, honestly. It's the fact that he doesn't seem as the same character as what Elle is portrayed in the manga.
Yeah.
And in the, obviously the anime, where he's kind of like awkward, and he's weird, and he's almost like disturbing, but in a funny way, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where like this, Elle seems very confident, he seems angry, he seems driven, and so did Elle. He seemed driven, but in a more complex way.
I mean, they might, because I mean, here's the thing, we do have to remember that it's a movie. At its longest, it might be 3 hours long. I doubt that they're going to do that, but in comparison to, a series that has 37 episodes, which I would say, out of those 37 episodes, I think L is in at least 24 of them. So, like, we're not going to have as much time to get into, and I guess I shouldn't say, the whole, like, Sherlock Holmes versus Moriarty sort of thing that the anime clearly went for. I mean, you had felt, those who don't know, Sugar is also a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes.
Huge.
Did not like the Sherlock Holmes movie that came out recently, though you didn't mind A Game of Shadows, but even then they didn't have the time to build up, the mental game of chess that they were playing the whole time. It felt very rushed. And with the storytelling the way that it goes with Death Note, even if you had a 3-hour movie, I don't know if you could necessarily have enough time to devote to characterizing L how he should be. So, I mean, it's going to be an inherent flaw with any sort of film adaptation, is that you have to do something different for L, because if you just try to duplicate what L was like in the anime, you don't have the time, and then he just comes across like this weirdo that you're not really... I don't know if you get the time to really, like, to ingratiate yourself to him, to, like really like him. He'd just come across as kind of awkward and weird, and you're like, why is this kid here? He feels kind of weird. Like, I want to learn more about Light, but you only get maybe 2 hours, so it's tough.
But even in movies, I found they've done the really awkward, kind of creepy character where it's like a standalone movie, and I feel like it could have been done. You just, like, I don't feel like it has to be full-blown like it was in the anime, because there was a lot of character for, I always want to say Light and L so badly, interchangeably.
Yeah.
Because it's like L, L, L. But anyways, L, where was I going? Right. He had, like, that really kind of awkward personality, yet he had, like, puns, and he tried to make humor, but it was kind of awkward humor, but it was still funny. Mm-hmm. But I feel like that could have still been, transplanted into this.
I mean, we see literally maybe 30 seconds of him in the trailers, so...
But in different trailers,
possible,
like,
yeah, it's possible that they might still have that, in his persona behind closed doors, but the trailer, at least the most recent trailer that we saw on the actual Netflix YouTube page, right, that trailer makes it seem like not only does L know what Light's doing, he already knows at that point that he has it and whatnot. He's like telling him, you won't get away with this, and it makes it much more of a direct competition as opposed to the way they did it in the anime, which was, L had his suspicions, but Light always did just enough to kind of throw him off the trail, and through a lot of complexity, which they do quite well actually in the anime, like showing off the thought processes and how everything ended up working. He threw him off just enough to kill him. I mean, that's the long and the short of it, is Light gets the better of L at the end. But again, I think it's the curse with a film adaptation, where I just don't think you would have had the time to get everything you needed from that L character the way they did it. Plus, from the looks of it, Light seems like an entirely different character. Like, they're using the term adaptation quite loosely, it feels like to me. Like, there's a lot of things about that where at the start of the trailer, Light is getting beat up, which, Light is supposed to be one of the most intelligent, well-respected people essentially in his community. He was never ever picked on in the anime. He was never seen as anything less than essentially a brilliant person, and that, maybe he was a little bored, but everybody saw him as brilliant.
He had the looks. He had like that ability to kind of sway women. He had that charisma, and in this, that's why I think it took everybody. Because anybody I know who watches anime and saw that trailer was like, "Who's this emo? Who's this poser?" And I'm like, I don't know, it's not Light. Like, I don't know who it is. I don't know what they're planning to do with him. And it's just like, I just hope they don't screw it up. Because, like, even I heard there was rumors, and I'm pretty sure it's a fact, where Warner Brothers had kind of first crack at it, and they dropped it. And that kind of gives you a sign of, like, I don't think you're going to do this justice. Maybe we shouldn't do it. And then they went to Netflix. And it's like, it makes you cringe of, like, oh, God.
Well, I mean, anime has not had a very good history of being adapted, into live action in general. We could probably have an entire podcast about that. But
Right.
like the only examples I can think of off the top of my head where they did it quite well, Speed Racer, was a pretty good adaptation. Granted, they just kind of took the very basic idea of what Speed Racer was, and then the Wachowskis were just like, let's just have a lot of fun with this world. And they went off and they did it. It is a criminally underrated film. If you haven't seen Speed Racer, if you've been like, oh man, that Dragon Ball movie was god awful, and those, the Death Note ones from Japan weren't very good. If you've been turned off on the idea of, adaptations of anime, go watch Speed Racer. It was actually a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I only watched it for the first time like 2 years ago.
Yeah, a friend of ours really loved it, so it was hard to ignore.
But then again, it feels very loosely based on Speed Racer, and it was more like taking this world and making a film within that world that makes sense, which is why, again, this adaptation, it feels very, very far removed from the characterizations that we know from the anime so far.
Yeah.
And
the thing about, I've been doing some reading about what went into production and other things, like who's producing it and the writers and so forth, and it seems like a lot of the story is going to be it just seems like, it's my fear, it's going to be loosely based on the manga, because it seems like they're going to go into conspiracy theories and other how these corporate different organizations and stuff like that, just conspiracy theories, and how it kind of spirals out of control. And it's I didn't need that. I don't need this conspiracy theory crap, because on Netflix alone I see conspiracy theories and all these hidden file cases and all this crap, and I'm excuse my language, but it's I just want it's my manga problem again, where it's I like the original, give me the original. You have Willem Dafoe, who's a creepy mother, and he's good at being that kind of character, and I was super, I'm sure he can do Reek well.
Oh yeah, he'll do. That's the best part of the trailer is Reek.
That's seeing him, and I was sweet, they got someone decent to do him. But anything else that I've seen, it's just kind of been gut turning, because I'm I don't want to know what they're doing, because it makes me feel sick thinking about it.
I don't think it's going to be that bad. But definitely the main problem I have is that the characterizations are going to be very different. Like I said, Light at the start is getting beat up, so then it seems like they're trying to justify him maybe killing off those who have been abusing him. Maybe they've been, stealing his lunch money for, years or something like that, which again, the story was a lot more powerful when it was just this insanely intelligent person, eventually succumbing to the idea of, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and essentially seeing himself as a god. Yeah. He literally called himself a god. He's like, I am the new god,
Well, the whole scene with Elle where he's washing his feet, you get that whole symbolism, you get that whole image, and you're wow, this is powerful. And just the scene, coming up, and I was already tearing up watching it, honest to goodness. When I was watching it, I was oh my god, Elle's gonna die. And you were sitting there, I was oh, this is horrible. And I was wait, there's more episodes after this?
It felt that should have been the ending.
I was what? But yeah.
So, and having Elle and Light be kind of confrontational with each other, which, don't get me wrong, that's part of the anime, but it was more on a mental level, and it was more kind of beyond the time when they're literally shackled together, which was actually planned out by Light anyways, which, like I said, this kid that they've got playing him and the way they're showing him in the trailer
seems like a
does
wiener.
Not. I wouldn't go as far as to say a wiener, but he definitely doesn't seem like this, put together, guy who's going to be extremely everything's going to be well thought out, everything's going to be planned. He doesn't come across like this genius who you, as an audience member, actually are very glad that he got the book, as opposed to just the way they characterize him now, some kid who's been beaten up by a bunch of bullies and now all of a sudden is I could kill them all. No, it was so much better when you gave the Death Note to somebody who essentially was shown to be your better.
Yeah. And going back to your thought on Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, that's what was everyone has a different reason for watching the show, but for me, it was that intellectual game of who is smarter, who can outwit the other, and how long can this go on for? Mm-hmm. And obviously there were several episodes, so it could go on for a while. But it's just that fact of, like, who can outwit who's actually better. And just watching that kind of mental back and forth where you see actual shots of, like, Elle looking at Light, where it's like, am I wrong? I can't be wrong. And it's like, I'll do another test.
Like, I'm never wrong.
I'm never wrong. And, like, just to, like, icing on the cake when, like, those awkward moments where you're like, I don't know what's going to happen, or it's just like, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's probably one of my favorites in the whole show, where she's like, I don't know what I'd do without light. He's like, yeah, without light it would be pretty dark. And I was just like, I can make jokes. And I was just like, that's so clever. And I was like, I know he's not like a social person, but just him trying to make that joke was just hilarious. And I'm worried that this adaptation will miss all those wonderful things, like the intellect. Yeah. It will just, I'm worried it'll be like this, like, I don't want to call it a cop show, but like literally this cat and mouse show of like him running, Elle chasing after him, and like we see the Ferris wheel scene, we see all this junk, and it's like chasing him around the city, smashing candies on a desk or something. It's like the one thing I've seen that they've integrated that is Elle, where it's the sweets, and it's like,
and Elle would never destroy sweets.
He would never destroy sweets.
He destroys them with his mouth, and then eats and consumes them.
And it's like, I feel like there's going to be such a loss, and like even hearing some interviews that I've seen obviously online and other things where it's like, oh, this is going to be so dark, it's going to have an R rating, and I feel like that's all they're worried about, especially after Deadpool. It seems like people are getting the wrong message of, if it's really dark and it's really gory and really disgusting, people will love it. And that's not what people loved about Death Note. Yeah, it was really dark, but kind of in the contents of like death and what we think about death, and
it's the I would say it's the definition. It's for mature audiences because the what the ideas, the ideologies that are brought out and whatnot are. It's for a more mature audience, and not to say that the anime itself didn't have some gore and whatnot. If I recall, there was a couple of times Light definitely killed people in kind of a gruesome way, but yeah. It was for a purpose. It was never just to be like, oh, I'm just going to show how gross it is, which it does feel like if they're like, this is going to be a hard R, we're going to show all of that stuff. It's like, that kind of goes against the idea of who Light is as a character, who would only be doing that to, prove a point. Or to be like, this is what happens if you...
against the crimes.
Yeah, the punishment fits the crime, and, he might do it as, an example of, like, if you're going up against me, this is what's going to happen to you. I'm a god. I can make anything happen. That sort of thing.
And that's the thing. He wanted to make an example. And, of course, everyone was afraid. And it actually reminded me a lot of, I can't think of the name of it right now, but a game you were recently playing.
Oh.
With the, I haven't played it yet, but you have. With the cat and the kids, and they have masks, and...
Oh, Persona.
Persona, thank you. I haven't played it, but I've been watching him play it. And it reminds me of that mentality where you have followers of, oh, that's so gross. I don't know if they're doing the right thing. But once it starts, like, rolling along, it starts getting this following of, yeah, they're doing the right thing. And then, like, kind of shows it in the trailer of, like, almost like this religious, godly following of Kira.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they have... I don't know. I want it to be good so badly. But I don't think we'll get it. Because I find, like... They're just cutting corners where they have the girl, so they're going to have her, like, being psychotic like he is. Where I'd like to see him actually manipulate somebody. Like, I want to see his mental prowess. I want to see Elle's mental prowess. I want to see all these things in action. I want to see that dynamic. Not just some nerd. I shouldn't say some nerd, because we're nerds. Some wiener. Some, like, little... Whoopsies. Some, like, little goose that just... I can't handle, like, I don't know if I'd be able to tolerate him, if he's going to be whiny, if he's going to be, like, this little, like, helpless thing where it's, like, Ryuk's, like, man up. Like,
if he's not going to be Light. Like,
yeah.
There's a reason Ryuk gives the book to him, essentially.
Yeah.
He doesn't pick some little wiener kid. He doesn't pick Elle, He doesn't pick any of these other people.
That's because Elle wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? Elle seems to have that moral standard of being more in the line of justice, where he's like, he is with the police. He is saying to Light that he would be the one to catch him. Obviously hinting at it. He wasn't like declaring him as the one, obviously, because he couldn't prove it yet. But it's still that line of he wouldn't do it. Whereas it gives the impression that Light would have done it because he had that mental prowess. He had that boredom. Like, you give a cat a toy, sooner or later it's going to play with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, I can't see this going well. If it does, I'll be pleasantly surprised. But just based on the trailers alone, he just seems like a wiener. And Elle just seems like aggressive and almost like he's going to be like chasing him. And he's wearing some sort of like weird mask. I don't know what that's about. Maybe he has like a facial like scar deformity or something. Or he's just trying to be suspicious. I don't know.
I think he's trying to hide his identity because at some point... I mean, if you're going through the anime at least, like at some point the people who are on the case are all trying to hide their identities because they have at least found out that, Kira needs to have their name in order to kill them.
But I mean, like, if it's like in the trailer where it shows him like running after him, I'm pretty sure like one of the people in the community, like, I don't know how big this city or town is, like if they're doing it, like it seems like they're all transplanting it into an American like story and theme and setting. Like, I don't think they're bringing any of the Japanese part of it over. So it's just going to be like this one guy chasing him down, and it's just like sooner or later you have to figure out who it is because he's the one always in your business.
I mean, the fact that we watched the trailer and we are this, nervous about it obviously goes to show that either we're right to be nervous or the trailer does not do a very good job at all of articulating how it, how it works off of the original material. Now, I will say I'm one of those people who I'm like, if you're going to do an adaptation, especially of an anime that's had hours and hours to work with...
Well, that's the thing. There's so much.
It's not good enough to just take what's been there and just, do a live-action version of it. Like, that's not the point of doing an adaptation. You're just going to do it worse because you don't have as much time to characterize these people, make us care about them. Mm-hmm. It's the reason why, as much as I love the Lord of the Rings movies, they'll never be as good as the books because you just had more time, more everything to really get yourself to care about these characters. And the reason why it was a good adaptation, the Lord of the Rings movies, was because they knew what stuff they could cut. They knew they could cut something like Tom Bombadil, who is an interesting character, but just...
not necessarily needed at that point.
Yeah, it's not needed, and they knew the kind of stuff that they had to keep on, which was why people who found the books to be boring probably found the movies to be boring, because they kept a lot of that stuff that really makes you care about the characters. They kept it in. The small stuff matters, especially when you're talking about something like Death Note, where that small stuff matters a lot. The little things that show you the differences between L and Light. The reasons why you root for one over the other. And the trailer is kind of going in the opposite direction, where they should understand that the little things matter. Like the fact of Light being picked on. That 100% changes the kind of character he is from what he was before. Well, I can't see him having this messiah complex in a way that would make the fans actually like him. Instead, it's going to be this god complex of like, now I can be the one who decides who lives and dies, who gets picked on, and all this sort of stuff. Like, it's a fundamental shift in his character. Yeah,
because I feel like somebody could say like, oh, well, based on what we've seen, you can't say that he will necessarily be this weakling, or like I use in my words, a wiener. But I find that they don't make him seem more confident like he is in the anime. Like in the trailers, his hair is tipped like blonde. He's like not... I'm not saying Light was ripped or anything, but definitely held himself with confidence, kind of had his chest out, was very aware of his abilities, where I don't get that sense from this character at all. He just seems like he's confused in what he's doing, he has no idea what he's doing, and he's kind of just going by the seat of his pants and ending up being lucky. Again, I could be wrong, but going into your Lord of the Rings reference, my fear, and like you were saying, Lord of the Rings was an actual adaptation. Mm-hmm. Whereas what I think will happen, and I could be wrong, is my fear is that they're going to use this ever so loosely, in the sense that it's going to be obviously the Death Note, Ryuk, and these kind of our main characters, but it'll all be based on something else. It'll be based, like I heard in interviews, like conspiracy theories, underground kind of like agendas, and having this American kind of localization where we're going to miss all the main things that we liked about Death Note. And that's my fear. Because, like, Lord of the Rings, you kind of knew going into it, it would be pretty like the book. And even when we watched the extended scenes, we got what we wanted.